I want to bring in Democratic strategist and former executive director of the New York State Democratic Party, Basil Smikle. Also here with us, Democratic strategist and co-founder of Lift Our Voices, Julie Roginski. Good to have both of you here. Look, there's no question Joe Biden's under a microscope. Every time he answers a question, later this week when he holds a press conference, whatever he does, whatever we hear from the other foreign leaders, it's going to be considered part of this ongoing test between now and the election. So, I don't know if we've ever seen anything quite this intense since maybe Nixon, right? And the decision he had to make. Does that essentially mean for backers of Biden 119 days of holding their breath?
Well, not really. If he maintains the same kind of attitude and energy he's had in these interviews the last couple of days. I like this Joe Biden. Voters want to know that you're going to fight for them. And what you're hearing from Joe Biden right now, and hopefully from the campaign in tandem with that, is that you're going to see a fighter on the campaign trail. We wasted a week of not talking about Donald Trump. What's Donald Trump doing?
Week and a half.
A week and a half. I mean, there was a lot of things that Donald Trump could have done, did do, that we could have been talking about, but instead he's watching Democrats. Because why get in the way of a boulder as it's rolling down the hill? So we got to turn the page, got to change the narrative. I think his language today and over the last couple of days suggests that. And just lastly, I will take a quote from Nancy Pelosi in 2018. Just win, baby. That's what she said. If you got to run against me at that time, do it. And that would be the message to Democrats today.
I mean, that is the question, though. I think people who have expressed reservations, including voters, it's can he win? And he was actually asked, Julie, earlier today on Morning Joe, to respond to people who don't trust right now that he won't have another night or incident, if we'll call it that, like he had on debate night. Let's listen to his response.
Look, I had a bad night, but the fact of the matter is, look at what I'm doing. I mean, let me put it this way. If there was something that was wrong that night, it's not like it comes and that's one night and it goes away. That's why I've been out. I've been testing myself, been testing everywhere I go, going out and making the case.
He says he's testing himself, but the plan is to keep testing him over and over and over again. Smart, or what are the risks?
Well, I don't really want him to be testing himself, right? I want a candidate who's going to go out there and take the case to Donald Trump every single day. Go Adam Hart, prosecute the case against Donald Trump. That's what we need right now.
That's the tricky part, though, right? How do you switch it from defending myself to doing what the campaign says he wants to do, which is go after Trump?
He's got to do what he did on Morning Joe today. He's got to do that every single day, over and over again. There's no reason on earth, if he's up to the task, why he can't go out there, cut through the noise, get out of D.C. to the extent that he can, go on the trail, and show the voters what he's got. If he's capable of doing that every day and really prosecuting the case against Donald Trump and creating that dichotomy between what he stands for, his incredible record over the last 4 years, and the apocalypse that we may be facing if Donald Trump gets elected. I shouldn't say maybe, will be facing if Donald Trump gets elected. Then great, that we're in good shape. But if he's not capable of doing that, we need to know that now. So it's not him testing himself. It's him showing the rest of us that he could be the leader that he needs to be to make sure that he's sworn in for another term in January. Or else, listen, Joe Biden's an old man. So is Donald Trump. But the rest of us will have decades, if not decades, of living with the reality of what's going to happen if Joe Biden's wrong and he can't get elected.
I mentioned this the last hour, Basil, and it's really no surprise to anybody. Chris Murphy said the clock is ticking. Yeah. I mean, exactly to Julie's point, if there is going to be a change or if he's going to calm nerves, it's got to happen, and it's arguably got to happen fast. There's been some coalescing around Kamala Harris, but is there really a clear path to beating Donald Trump? I mean, part of what we heard from the president this morning is who else is going to do it?
Just very briefly on Kamala Harris, I mean, this is why I have written about and have talked about for years. Why are Democrats inside or outside, on record or off the record, going after the sitting vice president? Because it's moments like this where you bring down the ticket, you devalue the ticket, and now you have to kind of run from behind, essentially. So having said that, put that to the side, there is a limited amount of time because the convention's in a month. And the fact that convention's in a month means you got to get delegates on board. There's got to be a smooth transition. Is there agreement on who the next person is going to be if it's not Kamala Harris? That person needs to raise money, go out and introduce themselves to the voters as a Democratic candidate for president. What happens if those persons' policies are different from the current president's policies? There's so much that needs to happen in a shorter period of time. That's why I like what Joe Biden said. If you want to go out and challenge me, go ahead and do that. And the fact that he met with...
He knows, Julie, that's not...
Yeah.
There's got to be a coming together, right, of leadership in the Democratic Party for this to even have a chance of happening.
Listen, the backbone of the Democratic Party, let's be very clear, are black women. They have been since at least LBJ, because no Democrat has won with a majority of the white vote since Lyndon Johnson. And so if you're going to skip over the first black woman to run for office, that is a horrible message to send to the base of this party. And if you're going to do that, that's fine. Go ahead and do it. But understand what you're leaving on the table if you go ahead and do that. And so if it's not Joe Biden, you have to make a really strong case as to why it's not his number two, who, by the way, has been his partner in what I think is the most successful administration in my lifetime. And so we got to cut through the chase here. Look, NATO's in town this week. Nobody's going to embarrass the commander in chief at a time when the Russians are bombing children's hospitals in Ukraine, at a time when NATO's panicking about the potential of Donald Trump returning. Nobody's going to do anything until NATO's out of town on Thursday. But then Friday, Saturday, Sunday at the latest, we need to either end this conversation and rally behind Joe Biden, or the president needs to make it clear that he's not running again and he's anointing whoever he's anointing, probably Kamala Harris. And we can't go into this into August or into the last 2 weeks in July with this hanging over us. We need to prosecute the case against Donald Trump.
And to state the obvious, black voters saved his presidency, saved his candidacy, and not a single member of the Congressional Black Caucus has come out asking him to step down. Basil Smikle, Julie Roginski, thank you both very much.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.